So in this video, I'm going to talk all about the 10-year deal that the United States just signed with Ukraine. I'll explain what happened, how it works, how it won't work, and what you should expect from it. So as you know, Biden and Zelensky signed a security deal as Ukraine's leader questions how long this is going to last. Now, this is the 16th deal that is bilateral. It's not NATO. You're not invited to NATO, but multiple countries, starting, I think, with the British and then the French and some others, all joined and had their own bilateral agreement. The most recent one was with Japan beyond the United States. Okay, so this is them inking the deal, signing the documents, and shaking hands. And so it was done yesterday. Now, at the same time that that was being done, in Washington, Trump was meeting with a number of Republicans. Matt Gaetz from Florida, he's about as Trumpy as they get, said that former President Trump criticized the $61 billion for Ukraine passed under Speaker Mike Johnson's leadership and signaled his disinterest in sending the war-torn country more support during his Thursday meeting with House Republicans. So about the same time that one thing's being done, this other thing's being done as well. Trump on Ukraine. They're never going to be there for us, Gaetz wrote in a post on the social platform X, sharing his comments from Trump in the morning meeting. Apparently, that's what Trump said. Well, Ukraine's never going to be there for us. I don't think that's right. I think Ukraine will be there for us in a big way. According to Gaetz, Trump also asserted that the U.S. should pay our troops instead of sending billions of dollars to Ukraine. I understand the perspective. I think that they're doing more with that money than any program that we could have devised. Trump has long been skeptical of providing additional U.S. assistance to Ukraine in its war against Russia, arguing support for Ukraine is not a vital American interest and Europe should be providing the bulk of the assistance. It is a vital American interest, but yes, Europe should be providing the bulk of the assistance. Many of Trump's staunchest allies in Congress have echoed similar calls. Okay, so that was happening there. Here's the actual tweet from Matt Gaetz. They're never going to be there for us. He says we should pay for our troops instead of sending $60 billion to Ukraine. Okay, that was just yesterday. Now, let's look inside the deal and see what it entails and what's going to happen here. So it's a bilateral deal. It's just between the United States and Ukraine. It is a security deal. It's not saying that if you're attacked, we have to, or if we're attacked or what. It's not that. It's just to provide aid. The final sessions of a G7 summit in southern Italy that produced a $50 billion loan to Ukraine. Okay, let's stop and talk about the $50 billion loan to Ukraine, because Putin is pretty unhappy about this and calls freezing Russian assets that provided the $50 billion loan. Now, it's a loan first. It's based on the Russian assets, and Putin's unhappy about that. And the G7 said, until reparations are paid, you're not seeing any of this 300 or 400, however many billion dollars are frozen back. And so he's very, very upset about this. U.S. President Joe Biden and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky signed a 10-year security pact that locked in American military aid and training through a presidential executive agreement with the current U.S. administration. Okay, it's an executive agreement. What does an executive agreement mean? Well, an executive agreement is not a treaty. It doesn't have the force of a treaty. Another administration can go and undo that. According to Britannica, here's an executive agreement, an agreement between the United States and a foreign government that is less formal than a treaty and is not subject to the constitutional requirement for ratification by 2/3 of the U.S. Senate. Now, this is a really troublesome point because, yes, they have a deal, but it's not really locking anything in like the article said. It was locking things in. A treaty is different. This is the Senate.gov website talking about what a treaty is. The United States Constitution provides that the president shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur. Article 2, Section 2. Treaties are binding agreements between nations and become part of international law. Treaties to which the United States is a party also have the force of federal legislation, forming part of what the Constitution calls the supreme law of the land. So it's very high in the pecking order, just subordinated just to the Constitution alone. The Senate does not ratify treaties. Yes, it does, but that's not exactly the process. What it's saying, following consideration by the Committee on Foreign Relations, the Senate either approves or rejects, that's the advice and consent, a resolution on ratification. If the resolution passes, then the ratification takes place when the instruments of ratification are formally exchanged between the United States and the foreign power. So that's the technical process, but essentially the Senate's vote allows it to be ratified, so we call it the Senate ratifies. Okay, that's how that works there. Okay, so let's go back to, and again, Putin's not happy about all this process, but this executive agreement, I mean, Trump can come in and with a stroke of a pen wipe out this 10-year security agreement. So it's not really that strong. Now, why would Biden do that? I just don't understand. You have the Senate with you. You could get 67 votes from the Senate, but he hasn't. And I'd hate to think that it's for a political calculation that, like, well, keep me in power because I will do this thing and, he won't. I hope that that's not it, but I just don't understand. You have the numbers with you. Why you wouldn't? Yeah. Okay. Today is truly a truly historic day, Zelensky said at a joint press conference with Biden after signing the security agreement. Our security agreement is a bridge to Ukraine's membership in NATO. Okay, so this gives us a 10 years of breathing room to have support before they can get to NATO or conclude the war and then get to NATO. Today, the United States is sending a powerful signal. It's really not that powerful, but it is a signal of our strong support for Ukraine now and in the future, a statement from the Biden administration read. Specifically, the agreement lays out that Washington and Kyiv must consult with each other within 24 hours at the highest levels after any future armed attack by Russia. So so they're going to coordinate more, and that's a positive thing. In response, Zelensky's regular calls for more air defense systems for Ukraine, especially as Russian airstrikes have destroyed more than half of Ukraine's power generation infrastructure, Biden said that 5 countries had already pledged to give U.S.-made Patriot missiles to Ukraine. That's Patriot missiles, not Patriot systems, okay? And by the way, they're not getting them until they replace their own. So he noted that these countries would have to wait for manufacturers, Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, to replenish their stocks until Ukraine's needs were met. So it's not, you got to really unpack this to understand what's in it. The U.S.-Ukraine agreement is similar to the one the U.S. had with Israel, where the U.S. provides arms for Israel's fight against Hamas. The Ukraine agreement is meant to ensure future U.S. administrations continue supporting Ukraine, but Trump could potentially end it if he wins the election. Japan also signed the security pact. So 15 and 16, I don't know who was first or second, but yeah, about 16 countries are, that might be 16 and 17, I'm not sure. About 16 countries have agreed to some kind of bilateral agreement with Ukraine. And that's good news. Although Zelensky, this is Euromaidan Press, although Zelensky did not specify which countries he was referring to, he noted that he was very pleased with the security agreements with the United States and Japan. Okay, so here's a little bit more of the analysis. The Ukraine-U.S. security agreement is not a mutual defense agreement. Okay, so that's not what it is. Not like if we're attacked, you're coming to our aid and vice versa. It's a security agreement, and as such, it creates a very broad fundament for cooperation in all possible fields, from intelligence to weapons development. And he says, let me elaborate. The mutual defense mechanisms are clearly linked to the NATO future of Ukraine, as reaffirmed in the preamble. The same preamble stresses the goal of restoration of Ukraine's full control of its territory and right for self-defense in accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter. The aims of the agreement themselves are not of mutual defense character, though. It's it's not like it's not creating an Article 5 kind of scenario like in NATO, but it's linked to a broad number of cooperation areas. It foresees extensive exchange of intelligence information, cooperation, modernization, arms development, reforms, etc. Joint exercises, increasing interoperability, which will move them on a path toward NATO, and that's kind of the ultimate goal. The economic part of the agreement foresees compensation by Russia for damages, and that's what the G7 came to when they were talking about that they're going to make sure that nothing's released until Russia provides reparations for what they've done to Ukraine. Just peace and Ukraine's peace formula are included into the text of the agreement, what increases the weight of the peace formula as part of international law. This is a very good sign. Overall, it's a good agreement. Just do not expect it to be a sort of NATO light. That's not what it is. It's not NATO light, and it's not even a treaty. A little bit more. Igor Shushko, who's a very good source, provided this, and I read it and I went, I don't think that's right, but then he corrected himself. Breaking, according to Igor Shukova, deputy head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, the 10-year security agreement between the United States and Ukraine will be sent to the U.S. Congress for ratification. If true, it'll make the agreement binding for the full term, the full 10-year term. Okay, then he added something else and added something else. So if the long-term U.S.-Ukraine security agreement is to be converted into a binding treaty, then 67 votes would be required in the Senate to ratify it. The House of Representatives do not get a vote, and that's true. That's how treaties actually work, but that's not what it is. And then he corrected himself again. Update. Zhukova may have been misquoted. It appears he said that the security agreement will be getting a vote in both chambers of Congress. That wouldn't be for treaty ratification. I'd guess that it's for appropriations to ensure the agreement is fully funded. And that's what's going to happen. So you're going to have the same kind of scenario that you had this past year, where to fund anything through the U.S. Congress, you're going to have some infighting in the House and perhaps in the Senate for any appropriations, but it's not a treaty in any meaningful sense. So that's what we know, but be careful when you're thinking through this. I saw this meme and I thought, there's something to this. If the government had a sandwich making program, it would look like that. So you just have to be careful with anything that the government does. Again, here's the big point. It is not a treaty. It's a 10-year agreement that could be over by January, depending on if Trump gets in office and what Trump would choose to do with it. Okay, that's all that you need to know. Put your questions in the comments below. Thank you for your time and the likes and the shares and the subscribes. To my patrons who are board level members, we are doing our Zoom meeting tomorrow at 9 o'clock. I sent you an email. I put it on Patreon. I'll see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.